It makes me wonder a bit more about, therefore, Trump's short-termism. His decision to take war to Iran. We've got a munitions shortage issue now, not only in provision to the Europeans that are buying it on behalf of Ukraine, but also just in the Middle East against Iran on its own terms. What does this do to the psyche of China, but of course also Taiwan, and any allies and partners that might be concerned about a conflict that they might be drawn into?
There's three principal munitions being used in the Mideast. Long-range precision strike, which we probably barely had enough of for a China-Russia campaign before it started. So this is like Tomahawks and JASSM-ERs. We used 40% of them. That worries everybody. So now we don't have enough for China-Russia. That's one group of weapons. There is a group of weapons we're in good shape on. Short-range precision-guided munitions, what we used for like the last 30 days of combat, in that 40-day war. This is where you've broken down their air defense systems with the long-range stuff. But then you have defensive weapons, THAAD and Patriot, where we didn't have enough for China or Russia before the war. We used a ton of them, and now we have way, way, way too few for the Russia and China scenarios.
This is The Global Gambit.
You're watching The Global Gambit, everyone. Welcome back, where we are pivoting towards Southeast Asia. When we talk about Ukraine, when we talk about Iran now, when we talk about a few other areas, of course, China is there lingering in the background. How much influence does it have over Pakistan as a mediator? How much does it perhaps support the ailing economy of Russia? And of course, then this leads to the strategic competition with the United States and the concerns over Taiwan as the potential flashpoint that will define so much of our time. And it's time, I think, we talk about it a little bit more, because it's getting quite interesting. Trump is courting Kim Jong-un for some reason and threatening to remove military personnel from the Korean Peninsula, from the 38th parallel. So let's make sense of some of this. And to do that, we're joined by Mark Montgomery, who's a retired Rear Admiral and Senior Director of the FDD Center on Cyber and Technology Innovation. And as you were just telling me, Mark, off there, just came back from Taiwan, from Taipei and parts of the island, to see some interesting activities, some of the latest developments there. So to start off, of course, welcome to the show. What did you hear? What did you see? And how do you feel about everything, given what Trump's been doing with South Korea now?
Yeah, great. That's a great way to think about the introduction, by framing it with Iran and Ukraine, because the way I think about Korea, Japan, Taiwan, and the threat from China is that this really is part of an axis of aggressors. China and North Korea, the two protagonists in Asia, are big players in Ukraine. I mean, North Korea, has provided 6 million rounds of artillery and mortar and 12,000 troops that fought in Kursk, and allegedly another 30 to 50,000 troops are coming in. And they're providing ballistic missiles that are being fired today by the Russians. China's backstopped the whole affair economically, increasing their trade 30% with Russia to make up for sanctions from Europe and the United States, and is providing microelectronics that allow Russia to build ballistic and hypersonic and cruise missiles. So it is all connected. And the connection in Asia is about the threat, principally you talk about first, the threat to Taiwan from China. And, I spent my whole military career thinking about the most dangerous scenario, the cross-strait invasion, lots of ships, helicopters, trying to get what's called a lodgment of, Chinese forces into Taiwan, and then their Navy and Air Force pushing out past Taiwan so they can have air control over it. And how would the United States work with Taiwan, but also maybe Japan, to kind of push that back? And I think that's important that someone in the Department of Defense do that. But that's not the most likely scenario. And what I saw in the last couple of weeks in Taiwan was them exercising their ability to preserve their societal resilience and push back on a cyber-enabled economic warfare campaign, which I think is the most likely scenario.
So let me get the question out of the way then, which is, America has issues at home. There is a concern over the deficit now, and, let alone the national debt. Isn't it, why should America be coming to the support of Taiwan? What interests are there to fight the other biggest superpower across the world on behalf of an island in the future? Why is this such? You know?
I'm glad you're asking that question because I feel Donald Trump is asking that question. The other day when he was on Air Force One flying back from China, he was dismissive of Taiwan. He said it's 9,800 miles away. It was almost like this. Let me explain to you. Taiwan is probably the most important country in the world to the United States economy. It's a close, if it isn't, it's a close second or third to China and Canada. It's unbelievable. So first of all, let's put it in perspective. Taiwan is 23 million people. It's a small country. It's our fourth largest trading partner. It's Canada, China, Mexico, Taiwan, and Canada and Mexico is because of geographic proximity. So it's really them and China. And Germany and Japan, the big powerhouses, they're small, less trade with the United States. And Trump hates this trade because it's 200 billion from Taiwan, 50 billion from the U.S. He hates that trade deficit. I call it, to use his vernacular, a big, beautiful trade deficit, because that 200 billion coming over from Taiwan includes 170 billion of compute. And what I mean by compute is semiconductor chips and some microelectronics that go along with them. That 170 billion drives $4 trillion plus of US GDP, and not some Davos bullshit mathematics. This is real. 4 trillion. It's not replaceable. The chips that drive our phones, our F-35s, our F-150 trucks, our TVs, our refrigerators, anything we're building in the United States, it's got Taiwanese chips in it. They're 95% of the high-end chips. 70 to 75% of the legacy chips come from Taiwan. There's not a replacement for it. It is indispensable to the United States. So when the president's dismissive of the need to defend Taiwan or questions the value of it, he completely is bereft of facts, which is disappointing that Secretary Bessent, the Secretary of Treasury, Secretary Letnick, the Secretary of Commerce, can't make it clear to the president that we need Taiwan as much as Taiwan needs us, maybe more. And as a result, we've got to do a better job of partnering with Taiwan, figuring out how we build our military security together to match our economic coupling, because we're not going anywhere without them. We're not going to build our way out of this dependence on Taiwanese chips.
So you're saying it's a military and economic necessity, but people who are perhaps more on the left part of the political spectrum will argue that continued warmongering is not necessary, and that there are more constructive or volatile ways to get what you want from Taiwan, to get what you want from China. You're saying that that's not the case, that the CCP can't be trusted, and that there is no cooperation with China. It's more competition that is largely the determining way the world works like that.
100%. I'll go further. Like, I've heard that from the left too, and I'm like, you got to be kidding me. So you'd like to argue against supporting a democracy, a thriving democracy, with a First Amendment and free press, free speech, freedom of assembly, free elections, fair elections that lead to split government, which causes beatdowns inside the parliament. This is democracy at its greatest. Why would we not support that? Why would we throw our lot? Why would we be like, well, possibly we should talk to the CCP, which is where President Xi, his elections are all 90. I'm sorry, he doesn't even have 99% elections now. He has 100% elections. And if you remember how he treated his predecessor at the last, big communist party get together, he frog marched out Hu Jintao, his predecessor, for even thinking about possibly not agreeing with a minor thing, that Xi says. So there are many, many reasons to support Taiwan that both the left in America and the conservatives in America and the business in America ought to support. There is no reason not to support Taiwan other than President Trump likes strongmen. He's attracted to Xi. He's attracted to Kim Jong-un. He's attracted to Putin. Heck, he's attracted to the president of Syria, who's an ISIS and Al-Qaeda, alumni. But the president says, hey, he's a good-looking man. The president has a problem, has this this predilection for authoritarian leaders. It's not healthy. It's not right. Taiwan is the right place for U.S. allegiances to be.
Okay, so this is quite interesting then, because we've had a couple of other staff from the FDD, and there's obviously a spectrum of political viewpoints in Washington. But the one thing that Trump seems to have done, especially after the war with Iran started, is bring together people from a diverse array of ideological and political positions into a consensus that the guy is single-handedly undermining the influence, relevance, reliability of the United States, including yourself, because you're hawkish on China, if I'm able to say that. But even you are severely critical of Donald Trump and his seemingly self-destructive policies. Would that be a fair way to put it?
I am uncomfortable with how he treats. Look, I spent 36 years in the military, 6 more years in government as a senior executive. In that 40 years, I had there was one thing that was beaten into my head every, day. America's strength lies in its alliances and its allies and partners. And I think that gets proven all the time around the world. I mean, our ability to, kind of dictate world trade and benefit immensely from financing and informationalizing things around the world. We benefit greatly. And this guy comes in and has aggressively undermined those alliances. Now, there's things I like. The president has said smart. When he's right, I'll say he's right. He was right about a golden fleet needing to build a navy. And I don't say that as I'm critical of the Navy. I don't say this as an admiral. He was right about something called Golden Dome. He's right about pointing out Chinese market distortions and how they brutally do it, and going back into tariffing them to try to get it back to normal. I'm okay with a lot of the things, with some of the things he does, but his treatment of allies and partners, and nowhere worse than Europe, where he threatened Greenland, disengaged from Ukraine, personally dissed, Keir Starmer and Giorgia Meloni and others to no advantage. It's terrible. But in Asia, they really need us and rely on us. They don't have another option. They can't band together like Europe could under under a NATO banner and work together. They are on their, largely on their own. When he mistreats Korea, mistreats Japan, mistreats Taiwan, it leaves a mark. It's really dangerous. And these are all three of those. Japan and Korea aren't as important as Taiwan, but they're pretty damn important to our economy. And I'm very uncomfortable with what he's doing.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. This isn't meant to be a psychoanalysis of your personal positions. It's just simply quite interesting for me because, for example, we had a counterpart from FDD, General McMaster, on a couple of weeks ago. And he was very bullish on approach towards Iran. Now, don't get me wrong. There's nothing I think is vehemently disgusting than the Islamic Republic. But I don't think the approach the Trump administration has taken has exactly yielded the results and impact that it was presumed, desired, expected, etc. So, how far do you think the United States should go in protecting Taiwan? Is it a case of all-out military operations in a hypothetical, leveraging the second and first island chains? Allies and partners, as I've said for years, is the most important strategic asset the United States has. How would the United States better leverage this against China?
Look, no, it's a fair question. First, again, I'll give Trump a benefit here. He has restored our defense spending. Our defense spending has actually gone below 3% of GDP. Despite all his criticism of Europe, the first budget he got was 2.9. Now, he fixed that with a reconciliation plus got it up to about 3.1. And this year's budget input he put in with reconciliations, 3.5%. It'll probably end up around 3.3%. These are meaningful changes. He'll change the defense budget 30% between over his first two budgets. That's a big deal. That allows us to build the deterrent the capable force in capacity to deter China. Now, the speed at which we get there is going to be slowed down by our munitions usage in Iran, but we're going to get there. But there also has to be a credible belief that you'll use it. Deterrence works when you have a force and someone thinks you'll use it. Then you can deter their actions. He is weakening the deterrence one when he downplays the importance of Taiwan or questions whether he should even do foreign military sales to them. He downplays deterrence when he has a bromance with Kim Jong-un and cuts the military exercises with South Korea. So he undermines the credibility of American resolve in Northeast Asia, and he's doing it in both those areas. He's not done it yet with Japan, but give him a chance. He might do that. And so I am very worried about this. This is a significant issue. He's helping in the capability capacity on the one hand, but undermining the credibility on the other. It's not helpful. He needs to get both of them in sync, working hard to do that. And that's not happening right now.
Yeah, it just look, I mean, not only has he made the threats to Taiwan, I mean, this is going back now to January. I monitor Taiwan weekly, and the exercises, the Chinese have been very hawkish towards the Filipinos, the Philippines. We've seen barely any coverage of that, barely any engagement from the Americans in responding to that. But of course, now we have this sycophantic almost buttering up of North Korea and a desire to want to reestablish some kind of engagement. Is that an attempt to distract from the absolute dumpster fire that is the war in Iran? But what I love is Pyongyang has already just said, not interested. So what is he trying to do? And why is he so obsessed with strong men like Kim Jong-un? I mean, Putin is one thing, but Kim Jong-un is, help me understand this.
Yeah. Kim Jong-un's not doing topless calendars, right? Yeah. So first of all, you're absolutely right to say it could be a distraction, from Iran. But I will also say
a distraction from something else as well, but I'm not going to mention that. That'll say everybody in the comments, a certain set of files. But anyway, sorry, go on.
So let me keep going. So it's a distraction, but on top of it, there's a truth to it. This is like Greenland. Everyone's like, how can he go back? He did it in 27. This Greenland fixation. He is resurrecting every unresolved beef from his first administration, where he felt the deep state stopped it. The deep state didn't stop the U.S. from buying Greenland. Denmark and Greenland stopped the U.S. from buying Greenland, and they'll stop it again and stop it again. And the reason he won't be successful with Kim Jong-un is Kim Jong-un is not going to give up his nuclear weapons. And if he was at all soft on that, watching what Iran's going through right now as we try to prevent them from getting a nuclear weapon, it's kind of a lesson. It's better to have them than not have them, right? He's not going to get, we're probably not going to do a 40-day air campaign against him while he has nuclear weapons. So he's not giving them up. If the president thinks there's a path to a Nobel Prize through Pyongyang, he's crazy. So I tend to think this is a mix of distraction plus kind of forlorn hope, where you just somehow believe you're going to get something against all odds, and that's just not going to happen in this case.
No, it isn't. And I'm also kind of curious if we flip this round a little bit. The Chinese back in January, there was a significant, you mentioned about Hu Jintao, but there was also a massive purging of the PLA back in January, which was largely overshadowed by Operation Absolute Resolve, i.e. Venezuela and Maduro, which I wanted to cover, but again, overshadowed. So what's been the fallout from that? And how significant is that as a situation for the CCP, for President Xi Jinping to do that? Because I, from my limited, intricate understanding of internal dealings like that with China, was very surprised. I'd never seen anything like that.
Yeah, so he got rid of a super majority of his generals, right? Maybe 80 of 107. Some, I don't have the exact numbers there, but close. Here's the challenge. Some of it, they say it's corruption. Some was corrupt. Probably a small number were corruption. Some number were corruption. By the way, abetted, acknowledged, and allowed corruption until it wasn't, right? It wasn't like hidden corruption. But the vast majority of it, I think, was loyalty. It was a sense that he didn't think that they were loyal to his vision for how the army is going to support the party. And as you probably know, the PLA is not an organ of the government. It's an organ of the People's Liberation Army is not an organ of the government. It's an organ of the Chinese Communist Party. And his loyalty lies to that. And he felt that. Even though he'd appointed many of these generals, I just think he lost confidence in he lost confidence in them. And he did this purging. I will tell you, it does make it unlikely that he's going to do a cross-strait invasion in the next year or 2 years, because he's got to kind of repopulate, retrain, re-educate, kind of get officers rapidly up through the ranks, right? When you got things that badly. We'll have to see. It doesn't mean you can't fight. Stalin cut through his general officer corps like a hot knife through butter between 1935 and 1939 and still fought a pretty aggressive war from 1940 to 1945. So, you can, generals are replaceable. We know that, right? And so, he can do that. But I do think that puts him off a little bit. Now, I think from his point of view, it's probably okay because 2027 has not been the actual date for several years. In other words, there's a famous thing, a friend of mine, Admiral Phil Davidson, said 2027 in some congressional testimony. The intelligence community revealed that Xi was thinking about making sure the military was ready in 2027. His military is not ready to do a cross-strait invasion in 2027. And we're in a much better position than we were in 2021 when Davidson said that our ability to repel it went below their ability to conduct it in 2027. Well, we changed. Putin invaded Ukraine, and we got smarter on munitions. Then Trump came in and was spending more money. We're spending more money. Japan observed Putin invade Ukraine and doubled their defense spending. Taiwan's doubled their defense spending. Australia's increased their defense spending, 50+% over that time frame. So everyone's focused a little more, doing a little better. So yes, it matters that he got rid of these people, but no, it doesn't change the date when he's going to be ready. I still think it's more like 2030, 2031. And that's why I worry about that cyber-enabled economic warfare campaign, which doesn't involve the military.
Yeah. So, oh God, there's a number of ways I could take this, and it's challenging to know which way. I'll go with this one, which is simply, China is a bit of an enigma. It's quite nebulous, the understanding of how China's military structure works. The relationship of the PLA to the CCP, I think, is largely misunderstood or not understood very well from a lot of Western policymakers. Not that I know it very well. But the other thing that I think is a component of that, and I'd be interested for your thoughts on this, given your experience with Taiwan and how they manage it, is crisis communications. Ever since the balloon of 2023, right, or the very infamous moment over the United States, from my understanding, there was little to no access or direct communications between the Chinese and the Americans in a way that the Soviets and the Americans had during the Cold War, the telephone, especially. Has that changed now? And if not, how does the United States ensure that there isn't a misunderstanding over escalation, over tensions in the South China Sea, over the Nine Dash Line, or whatever?
Yeah. So, well, first, historically, you're right. My dad set up, when he was a Navy officer as well, and set up the first hotline between the United States and the Soviet Union in 1962 timeframe. And then stood watch on it for several years. So, I mean, we had a very intricate system. It was matched by systems at lower echelon commands. And you would actually talk to the real people. It was a real conversation with a real person, who was authorized to talk. The Chinese system, to the degree that we have one, is a shadow of that. Which is to say, I had a system when I was the PACOM J3 to call someone. It went away and it's come back now. There's no one to answer on the other line. And when they answer, they have nothing to say. You're not going to resolve a problem with, basically a note taker. And they're just not empowered to talk. The only phone line you really need is Trump to Xi. And they just, in the end, do that through, literally a cold call.
Mark, I'm confused. How does that work if Trump's just got one of those phones that plays the animal sounds?
Yeah,
how does that get?
Yeah. Somebody else. This is on his desk, and they call for him, and then hand him the phone, and then there's like 3 note takers listening, and a translator and all that. So it's quite the event. Look, we don't have that kind of thing. I know the Trump administration's bragging that they've got one going again. I'll just tell you, let's wait till a crisis and see who answers on the other end of the line. I mean, you don't have a real communications control system for crises till you test it in a crisis and find out that the other side participates. So I'm gonna go ahead and maintain my cynicism until I'm told that they had an actual crisis event and resolved it through a phone line at a level other than the President of the United States.
Interesting. And I guess more broadly, again, sort of, so for people who aren't, again, that familiar with the Chinese structure, you have the Standing Committee, which is the most senior section of the whole CCP. I think it's five individuals who advise, President Xi. So
I think it got down to one person recently, as he fired everyone involved in it.
Right.
Yeah,
Well,
no
that's
kidding.
that's where I was going with this. Is what's the situation with that? Because he's replaced everyone of a competency based on meritocracy to just simply yes men.
Yeah.
So, how does that influence the decision making when it comes to whether or not to do something more militarily active over Taiwan?
Yeah. So, it's hard for me to understand how he didn't have yes men before. There were people he appointed whose career were completely dependent on him, but apparently that wasn't quite dependent enough. I mean, there was one former army guy, the last guy that fought in Vietnam, in 1979 was still on that standing committee. He's been pushed off.
Yeah.
But interestingly, the one guy he kept was kind of the rat, the political military guy who ratted out the others, and again, not a guy I would, imbue with a sense of loyalty, and so, we'll have to see. I mean, he's replacing, it's an authoritarian government. He has the right and the ability to do this, and he's moving in people he trusts more. I'm not aware of whether it's at a full status again already, but if it is, it's certainly, as you implied, guaranteed yes men. I don't think he's going to get a lot of pushback on any thinking.
Okay, so I've got a bit of a two-pronged question then, because one of the things I think a lot of people wonder about is obviously the propensity for China to make a move on Taiwan because the United States attention is distracted, albeit even more now because of its own interest, or Trump just doesn't care about Taiwan. So, firstly, does a prolonged unresolved Ukraine war or the Russian war in Ukraine make Xi more cautious on Taiwan? Or does it demonstrate that the West's, America's staying power is limited in emboldening him? But the second prong to that is simply because of what he's done to the military architecture of the PLA, does it mean that the idea of an invasion operation by 2027, as some people have called, is now likely delayed, if not going to happen?
Yeah, that's a great set of questions. So, and the first one will help. The answer to the first one will help answer the second one. I think watching Ukraine, he's watching Russia try to conduct a full scale invasion using equipment that's largely similar to the equipment he has, get bogged down and beyond a quagmire in terms of the deaths and the injuries to the wounded to the Russians. And he's thinking, hey, that gray zone hybrid warfare they were doing, from 2014 to 2022 seemed to be working. Why transition out of it? And so that's one lesson he gets from it. A second lesson is that, war is unpredictable. You would have never guessed where, the drones would have become this dominant, that we'd be in a drone learning cycle, basically who can develop and improve their drones in a faster learning cycle being the determinant thing, that air power would have almost no effect. All these things that were, part of Russian doctrine or U.S. doctrine and therefore Chinese doctrine before the war have been damaged. So I do think he looks at this and goes, man, that's a challenge. Let me take a look again at that cyber-enabled economic warfare campaign plan they briefed me on. And that's where he uses diplomatic, economic, legal warfare enhanced with cyber attacks, with disinformation operations, influence operations, and even military feints and missile closure areas and things like that to maximize the pressure on Taiwan. And that's looking like a much better playbook. And so we call that the most likely scenario. And so I think what he's learning from Ukraine is, hey, that most dangerous scenario has even more risk than I expected. And this most likely scenario looks to me to be the way I should go. To get to the second prong of your question, that makes that part easier, because if you're not pursuing the most likely scenario, then you have the time to change out your people like this. So he might be saying to himself, look, I'm going to focus on the most likely scenario for the next 3 to 4 years. I'll be reconstituting my military leadership, reconstituting my military, getting them ready. So if it doesn't work in 2031, 2030, I can use this. And I really think people say, when is this? What are you worried about? What time frame? To me, there's an election in January of 2028. It's the Taiwan presidential election. If the DPP, the current ruling party, if their candidate, which is going to be President Lai, the current president, if they win a 4th consecutive term, I think, 4 more years, so 16 years of what China perceives as anti-China leadership, I think he's going to go screw it, maximize that rheostat on the cyber-enabled economic warfare campaign, take it from 3 to 7 or 8 out of 10, and let's see if we can't break the societal resilience of Taiwan. And Taiwan certainly thinks there's a risk of this. And so that's what we see them exercising for. So I think your two forks are connected. The two, and they're connected because he can give up, he can make these military changes while he focuses on the most likely scenario.
Yeah, so it makes me wonder a bit more about, therefore, Trump's short-termism, because his decision to take war to Iran, and it sort of brings us back to where we started this conversation. We've got a munitions shortage issue now, not only in provision to the Europeans that are buying it on behalf of Ukraine, but also just in the Middle East against Iran on its own terms. So what does this do to the psyche of China, but of course also Taiwan and any allies and partners that might be concerned about a conflict that they might be drawn into?
That's a great point. So look, they're worried. I mean, Japan, Korea, Taiwan are all worried when they see this. I think we're worried. Now, let me break up the munitions for a second. There's three principal munitions being used in the Mideast. Long-range precision strike, which we probably barely had enough of for a China-Russia campaign before it started. So this is like Tomahawks and JASSM-ERs. We used 40% of them in a small war, a war with one of the lesser competitors. That worries everybody. So now we don't have enough for China-Russia. We're building them fast. We just gave a $23 billion contract for Tomahawks to get the number up to 1,000 per year in production. But that's to fix the problem 2, 3, 4, 5 years from now. That's one group of weapons. There is a group of weapons we're in good shape on. Short-range precision-guided munitions, what we use for like the middle 30, most of the last 30 days of combat, in that 40-day war. This is where you've broken down their air defense systems with the long-range stuff. We have like 100,000 plus of those rounds. We could hit everything in the world a couple times over. We're probably okay. But then you have defensive weapons, THAAD and Patriot, where we didn't have enough for China or Russia before the war. We used a ton of them, and now we have way, way, way too few for the Russia and China scenarios. And again, we just let two big contracts for a total of $75 or $80 billion for THAAD and Patriot to increase their numbers fourfold and threefold, respectively, over the next few years. But again, it will take years to recover and then get back to the level we'd like to be at. Then there's a fourth type of munition, drones, counter drones, that we had no ground-based counter drone system. We had an air-based one in F-15s, F-16s. That's fine for protecting things a long way away from the enemy, like Jordan or Israel or Western Saudi Arabia. But the places all close, like Bahrain, Qatar, UAE, Kuwait, Eastern Saudi Arabia, like Prince Sultan Air Base, got hammered by short-range drones because we had no ground-based system, which, by the way, you just had to look at Ukraine and knew this was going to be a problem. I noticed them with about 23 different types of ground-based drone systems that I observe routinely there. So they have a plethora of them. By the way, they've offered them to us on multiple occasions. Zelensky offered it directly to Trump, but Trump said, "You don't have any cards. I don't need your help." And he was wrong. So there we're completely bereft, and we need that. But then the fifth type of munitions that are really critical for a fight in China are anti-ship cruise missiles and Mark 48 torpedoes to sink ships. That stuff we didn't really use in Iran. So it's in pretty good shape, and it was in good numbers before. So what I'd say to you is it's a mixed bag in there, but there are enough things that are too low or way, way, way too low that we have work to do.
Interesting. So one final element I do kind of want to get your quick take on is cyber. We haven't really touched on it as much in this conversation because I think the sort of kinetic elements are so fast moving and prominent right now. But when you look at the cyber-enabled warfare, so to speak, you've talked about cyber-enabled economic warfare before. What does that actually look like in practice right now? And how concerned should we be about the US, China, AI, race, et cetera, in all of this?
That's a great point to come to wrap on, because that is an area that it's obvious we have a problem and we're ignoring it. So there was an operation called Volt Typhoon that was exposed 2 years ago. And Volt Typhoon is the name for a Chinese advanced persistent threat team, one of their hundreds of attack teams. This team concentrated on doing operational preparation of the battlefield, which is to say, they went into our networks, cyber penetrated our networks, for our rail systems, our aviation systems, our port systems, our power systems, our financial systems, our water systems, the way we do military mobility and generate economic power. And they put in malware, which is malicious software, or they put in hooks so they could come back later on, so they could disrupt or disable those systems at a later date. And the head of our FBI reported it. A bunch of us testified at Congress about it over about a month. And then the whole issue went away. It's still there. It's going on. There's we got rid of those 1,000, but they're putting them in other places. It's in Japan. It's in Taiwan. It's in Europe. China is going around the world creating the conditions where if a crisis starts, they're going to disrupt our critical infrastructures so that we can think hard about whether we really want to support Taiwan. And I'll tell you what's crazy about this is if they had done this by same infrastructure, same touch points, put a knapsack with 50 pounds of explosive in it and said, courtesy of the PLA, from China, we'd be at war. If we found 1,000 of these backpacks around all our infrastructure, we'd be like, who the hell do you think you are? But instead, we're kind of like, it's cyber, good job, boys. It was not espionage. It was a warlike activity. And we caught them. And they're doing it, and they're continuing to do it. And we not treat this way. So we are in a cyber-enabled economic warfare campaign being practiced by one side, China, and being ignored by the other side, the West. And we need to really get our act together. And by the way, the Russians observe this, and you can see them, they call it new generation warfare, but they're starting to do some of the same stuff in the Baltics and Poland, except they're Russians, so they can't help themselves. They also blow shit up. They do put the explosives on there, and they do chemical weapons, tests, and they do fly drones with explosives to Leipzig airport. They take whatever the Chinese are doing and say, we'll take it another level. But so we have two countries preparing for a crisis or casualty and ready to undermine our infrastructures at problems start. And both Europe, the United States, and Asia are taking, it's almost a laissez-faire approach. It's certainly not an aggressive or under duress approach, which is what you would have expected.
Thank you so much for your time. Quick take, bonus question, if that's all right. Who's looking more precarious right now, the United States or China, if you had to answer that question in a very binary sense, or it's a stupid question to ask?
So in the short term, that's a fair question. In the short term, it's us. But in the long term, I think we will get, as we change administrations, I think we'll restore our reliance on allies and partners. It'll take us a while to get the trust back. China has some long-term, hard to digest, hard to reconcile issues, not just with demographics, but with an economy that's built on creating disruptions and market disruptions in the West that we're going to block. That eventually we're going to work with Europe and stop. And I think in reality, in the long term, we're in a more stable position. But we've got 2.5 more years of rocky road.
Wow. Rocky road makes me think of the dessert, and certainly now that I want some. But thank you so much for your time. A real pleasure. And I look forward to doing this again very soon. Certainly want to have you back to discuss, as I say, more dynamics. Maybe we will talk about Iran at some point, because given your maritime expertise and what's happening with the Hormuz Strait or not, there's always something happening on a daily basis. But everyone watching, thanks so much. Do subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And of course, check out Mark's work over at the FTD. And we'll speak soon. Take care.